Alright, what's up? Good evening mga kabsat. Today is August 24. Kamusta po? At syempre ang topic natin walang iba kundi ang latest ngayong araw na 'to. Ano nga ba? So, pakita natin yung ating thumbnail mga kabsat. Sandali lang. Aba, tumalon. Saan pumunta yun? Ay, okay, nasa baba. Baligtad Anyway. Okay, joint venture. Suspended po dahil hindi siya tinantanan ng ating nag-iisang Congressman Marcoleta, mga kakabsat. Parang nag-e-echo tayo. Hello, hello. Test mic 1, 2. Hello, hello. Ayan, parang tayo nag-e-echo, no? Shoutout sa inyong lahat, mga kabsat. No? Sa mga bagong pasok, huwag kalimutan mag-like and subscribe. At parang kakaiba yung ating sound system ngayon, Kamusta po? Kamusta, mga kabsat? Grabe. So, ito yung latest ngayong araw na 'to, guys, 'no? At siyempre nalaman natin 'to kay Madam Sheila Maceda. Shoutout sa iyo, Madam Sheila Maceda. Ayan, nabanggit niya 'to kaninang umaga, actually, yung live natin kanina. So, ayun nga po. So, ito nga. So, try natin pag-usapan 'to, guys, 'no? Pero siyempre, bago natin umpisahan, mag-introduction muna tayo. Kanino kaya? Kay sige. Dito muna tayo kay Don Kengkoy ulit. Wala nang katapusang Don Kengkoy. Don Kengkoy. Kontrata naman ngayon. Ako, bakit hindi nag-connect? Dali.
Bluetooth connected.
Yan, connected na. Don Kengkoy muna tayo, mga kapsat. Kontrata.
Magdamag, nagising ako, hindi makatulog.
Parang nagkakrak yung sound,
Di dala.
Shoutout sa lahat, mga kapsat. Ang parang robot yung boses ko. Totoo ba? O, dito ko lang naririnig.
Maiwan ko kayo.
Shoutout, Ma'am Lynn Garcia, Ma'am Leticia Chapiosen. Magandang gabi. Ayan Ay, nanalo si SMB. Wow, congrats. Anong score na? Game 2, 1-1 na. Ayun, no? Nako. Marami pang pala, no? Nakita ko yung live ni Live ni Joms TV. Grabe, dami niyang viewers. 15,000 viewers, no? Congrats sa kanya. Shoutout Ma'am Maricel Mabalot, ang saya kahit kailan. Watching from Hong Kong, Marcela Villanueva.
Tag-araman at tag-lamig, hindi pa dadaig.
Check ko nga kung anong sound niya dito.
Bisig. At kung dalawin ang lungkot, ang anak ko ang gamot. Mundo ay tuloy ang ikot.
Bakit ang nangyari doon? Meron din tayong poll dyan, guys, no? Bago yung sumagot sa poll natin. Baka lang naman.
gising ako, hindi makatulog, di dalawin ang antok. Bukas ay babalik na ako, kita-kita na tayo, tapos na kontrata ko dito. Pahinga ng isang buwan, tapos ay babalik na naman. Ang hirap ko ay kailangan na para sa pamilya lahat ibibigay.
Alright.
Magdamag.
Okay na. Salamat Don Kenkoy sa kanyang napakagandang composition para sa mga OFW. Naninibago ako sa sounds ng aking mic. May kakaiba ba mga kabsat? Kasi naninibago ko eh. Parang ewan ko lang kung may something or what. Dali lang ah. Hindi ko naririnig dito sa fan eh. Wait lang. Saglit lang guys ha. Connected ba to? Hindi naman. Okay. Sige. So, once again mga kabsat, no? Good evening mga kabsat. Late at night na naman tayo, no? Second live po natin ngayong araw na to. So, shout out again kay Ma'am Sheila Maceda, Maricel Mabalot, Ma'am Lynn Garcia, Musang 20. Yes, may mga bias na mga pagbabalita, mga abiyas. CBN 5 at ayun, tumatawa si Musang 20. Ayan, sino pa man natin? Ma'am Leticia Chapiosen. Ayan. So, again, at saka mga silent viewers natin dyan. So, pakita ko sa inyo to guys. No? Meron tayong, pati nagpakita. Ingay. Refresh. Group. Date modified. Okay. Kaya naman pala. Dali lang. So, meron pong statement ng ABS-CBN just today or kaninang umaga yata to mga absat, no? Pero, try natin silipin. Ito guys, Tayo magpakita. Ayan. Kita nyo ba? So, ABS-CBN, official statement August 24, today. To address the issue which have been raised by a certain legislators and the National Telecommunications Commissions on the proposed investment by ABS-CBN for the minority interest in TV5, ABS-CBN, and TV5 have agreed to a pause in their closing preparations. As far as we know, guys, no, I think at the end of this month, August, magko-close na yung kanilang deal. Pero mukhang ito, imbis na close, post. So, nangyari dito is suspended, kumbaga parang ganun, no? Anyway, this pause will give the space for both media organizations to respond to their issues. Ayan, ako nung issues kaya to. And accommodate any relevant changes to the terms. Both ABS-CBN and TV5 believe that an agreement between the two media companies will have an favorable impact on the Philippine media and on a free-to-air television, which remains the most affordable and extensive source of entertainment and public service to Filipino daw. Yan ang statement nila, mga kabsat. Pero, tingnan natin, laliman pa natin yan na, wait. I-dig natin ng gusto yan. Puntahan natin dito. Bago natin pakinggan yung hearing kanina sa House of Representatives. So, dito muna tayo sa ABS-CBN agreement. Pakita ko lang sa inyo. Ayan, mga kabsat, no? So, statement update on the ABS-CBN investments agreement with TV5. So, 1:46 p.m. to kanina. Official statement to address the issue which have been raised certain legislators and National Telecommunication Commissions or NTC on the proposed investment of the ABS-CBN and minority interests in the TV5, ABS-CBN, and TV5 have agreed to pause the closing preparations. This pause, ito yung basa ko kanina, will give the space both media organizations and to respond to the issue and accommodate any relevant changes to their terms. Both ABS-CBN and TV5 believe that the agreement between the two media companies will have a favorable impact on the favorable impact talaga on the Philippine media and on a free-to-air television, which remains the most affordable and extensive source of entertainment and public service to Filipinos. Ayun. Tapos, yun na yun. Parehas lang pala yung laman doon. Anyway, nako na yun, nagsisilabasan yung mga kanila, no? Yung mga shows nila, mga kabsat, no? So, anyway, so, kung di tayo no, talagang pinush ito, hindi nila pinalusot, especially dito sa hearing nila kanina. Nag-hearing po yung House of Representatives kanina, guys, no? So, actually, na-scan ko naman na to kanina, pero mas maganda pag, sana hindi tayo although tawag nito, naka-credit naman sa kanila ito, pero let's see. Saan ka na? Ito po, nag-Zoom meeting po ang House Representative kanina. So, sabi dito, guys, no? Committee Legislative Franchise joined with the Committee on Trade and Industry Chairperson. So, the agenda for today is the speech of Representative Rodante Marcoleta delivered in plenary on August 15. That was last week, Monday. To merge of ABS-CBN and TV5. Ayan. So, mahaba tong kanila pero try nating i-splice, splash natin, hati-hatiin natin. Punta tayo sa pinaka-punto nila. Okay, let's proceed. So, ito na mga di ko na patatagalin. So, yung mga dyan, guys, pwede kayo mag-vote dyan, guys, no? Kung agree ba kayo sa suspension ng joint venture ng ABS-CBN at TV5. So, let's go and here we go.
That the member who has
May sounds ba?
has not completed his questioning after the 20-minute
Huwag kalimutan mag-like and subscribe,
in the
mga
avail
kapsat.
of the second round when time permits. Otherwise, he will be listed for the ensuing hearings.
Ayun eh.
Number 5, the members will not be allowed to interrupt an interpolator.
Shout out,
an
Ma'am Tessie.
interpolation of another member.
Okay naman sounds,
And,
maestro. Ayun,
number
ayun.
6, please
Sige.
observe
Salamat po, salamat.
proper decorum and avoid heated arguments.
Dali
Always
lang.
address the chairman
Fast
in
forward
asking
natin
the
ng konti.
questions
to inform
Oops, sino to?
and
Tumalon na.
Can you call NTC? Except NTC first.
Oo, NTC officer.
good morning, good afternoon
Okay.
to all the members of the
NTC
two
na to,
committees, present this afternoon.
I know who's speaking.
Narinig niyo po ako,
Yes.
malinaw.
Sino po sila?
Okay. Ano po, magandang hapon po. This is Commissioner Cordoba po ng National Telecommunications Commission.
Commissioner.
Good afternoon to everyone, and we thank the chairpersons of the two committees for giving us the chance to attend this hearing this afternoon and to give our insights and ideas on this item. Mr. Chair, paano po ang
Okay, malakas yung sounds natin. Naririnig ko sa
You read the-
cellphone ko.
You have a copy of the privilege speech.
Yes.
Salamat po sa mga nag-like.
If you'd like to submit or say before this committee,
Okay, yes. Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for the clarification, Mr. Chair.
Salamat, Ma'am Teresa.
Okay,
Tangpus.
I would like to inform the honorable committees, that the honorable members of the committee, that the National Telecommunications Commission issued a memorandum order
Yan.
dated 23 June 2022. Memorandum order number 36/2022 po yan, ano. Basically po, the memorandum order states that if a franchise holder would enter into a commercial contract with another entity, that said entity should have no obligations sa outstanding obligations sa
Okay.
national and local governments. So for purposes of this, bago po namin aprubahan ng isang commercial agreement entered into na may jurisdiction po ang National Telecommunications Commission, ay hihingi po muna kami ng clearances dun po sa kakontrata ng franchise holder. And that includes
Mukhang madadamay dito ang TV5 guys na may hila yung kanilang
nandyan po kasi ang Bureau of Internal
affected ng
Revenue,
kanilang tawag
nandyan din
dito
po ang Bureau of
franchise.
Customs. And magbibigay din po kami ng clearance kung wala pong pending sa amin na babayarin or admin case.
Yun.
And hihingi rin po kami ng clearance from the Securities and Exchange Commission. And binanggit ko rin po kanina na kailangan din po ng clearance from the local government units. Kunwari po ba, meron po bang utang itong entity na to or corporation na to sa local government in the form of local taxes or real property taxes? Bayad po ba siya sa kanyang amilyar?
Commissioner ng NTC, pinapakinggan natin mga kakabsat po sa mga bagong pasok dyan.
Dahilan po niyan is, alam niyo po naman, we would want to enforce collection dahil kailangan po na ng ating gobyerno ng collection, lalo na po because of the pandemic. So, meron po tayong mga emergency expenses na kailangan po ng tulong ng ating pamahalaan. That's why we came up with this memorandum order. So, kung ito po ay itutuloy ng TV5, ang kanilang transaction with the ABS-CBN, then we would ask for the said clearances to be submitted to the NTC before we can approve po the commercial agreement date that they entered.
Commissioner Cordoba.
Ayun. Bali, ang basis po namin would be the memorandum order that we issued last June 23, 2022, Your Honors.
So yun lang ang ano mo.
Salamat po.
Meron ko bang
Mahina yung boses ni Icon,
Yes, yes. Ano po yun, Mr. Chair? Mr. Chair, can you repeat?
Chairman,
Sorry po, hindi ko po.
mahina yung boses niya. O kaya yung internet niya mahina.
will you be submitting any ito memorandum order sa mga
Yes. Yes, yes.
committee nito?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Opo, Opo, we will submit po our copy of the memorandum order to the honorable
Sabi ni Gabriel Antonio Yenko, yes, at kung pwede, di na makastream sa FB at YouTube. Ay, galit si Sir Gabriel, oh. Shout out, Sir Gabriel.
Commissioner Cordova?
ano lang po, maybe an additional item po, ano. There is a pending case po sa NTC against ABS-CBN dahil po may violations ang ABS-CBN sa amin noon pong 2020 kung saan po ay nag-ano po sila, pay-per-view
Ayun.
authority from the commission. So
Patay kayo dyan.
Violation na kailangan po muna namin matapos bago po kami makapagbigay ng clearance. Yan po ay isang kaso na pending po sa amin. Yun po, Your Honors. If the Honorable Committee wants, we can also submit a copy of that pending case before our office.
Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Ayan na si Dante Marcoleta, oh.
Yes, Honorable Marcoleta.
Mr. Chair, may I ask the Honorable Chairman of the NTC if the other violations established during the hearing of the renewal of franchise of ABS-CBN are not considered violations, because he only mentioned the violations in connection with the pay-per-view committed by ABS-CBN for the lack of authority of what we call the conditional access system. Did he not consider also the violations like the lack of permit of the encryptment of the content and the encryption of the signal is also a violation, and it lasted for several years, not only weeks and days, Mr. Chair. It has no permit.
Shout out, Ma'am Susan.
Broadcast of its 11 channels, Mr. Chair. Also, ABS-CBN violated the cease and desist order.
Boom.
It also sold millions of black boxes throughout the land, because without which the encrypted content cannot be viewed by our people. That is the reason why they violated the free-to-air contracts. These violations, Mr. Chair, that's why I'm asking the Honorable Chairman, because he should have included them in the context of violations as per the provision of the Public Service Act, which is 200 pesos per day per violation, Mr. Chair. As a matter of fact, I remember telling the NTC chairman,
Shout out, Junred
if he
TV.
had already computed all the violations established during the hearing, and I was told initially that the amount of the violation, Mr. Chair, is insignificant. Of course, I beg to disagree with him, because I made a computation, a detailed computation of all these detailed violations. And I came up with 1 trillion peso violation, Mr. Chair. So if he's talking only of the pay-per-view violations, I don't think that is complete. May
Tama.
I ask the comment of the NTC Commissioner, Mr.
O yan,
Chair?
hintayin natin yung comment. Ito na. Anong
Mr.
masasabi ni
Chairman,
Commissioner?
can I respond po? Yes, Mr. Chairman, yung po mga binanggit na violations po ni Congressman Marcoleta, we will look into it per detail po yun, ano? Kasi po, we cannot say that it's a violation right now or hindi. Depende po yan dun sa magiging labas po ng aming investigation. Kasi po, kakaroon po yan ng notice and hearing po sa concerned na corporation.
Mr. Cordoba, sinabi ko naman sa iyo noon na umpisahan mo ng usisain at imbestigahan.
Yun
Matagal na yun eh. 2020 pa yun.
O, 2 years ago pa.
Dalawang taon na nakakaraan. Bakit naman hindi mo kasi sinimulan?
Aray!
Ang pagkakaalam ko dyan, alam nyo rin na walang, you will admit that there is no permit dun sa encryption ng signal. Wala rin permit dun sa encryption ng mga contents. Hindi ba tama yun, Mr. NTC, Commissioner?
Opo, yun pong case na final sa amin ay tungkol po doon, sir. Yun po yung encryption po.
At motu proprio, you can investigate already, because that is the reason why the franchise was not renewed in the first place. Wala siyang permit for digital broadcast. At ito hindi lang days, hindi weeks, hindi months. It lasted for several years, Mr. Chair. At nakita mo rin yung when they migrated from analog to digital contents. Hindi ba nagkaroon sila ng demonstration, Mr. Commissioner? You only allowed them for 3 months. But the demonstration continued for years. And these are also
Grabe, no? 3 months to 4 years?
I'm not still mentioning the violations about the PDRs, which is supposed to be the jurisdiction of the Securities and Exchange Commission, as well as the tax evasion schemes that they have employed, Mr. Chairs. Dahil nangako pa ang BIR dito, these are all obligations that the NTC should have investigated in the first place. Kahit naman kahit naman siguro walang magdemanda o magasunto sa inyong opisina, Mr. Chairman, motu proprio kasi kasama kayo nung inimbestigahan natin yan. At ito'y public knowledge. At ang katotohanan nito,
Oo nga, nag-echo, no?
binabanggit
Bakit
mo
kaya?
yung memorandum, Mr. Chair, hindi lang national, meron din po silang local obligations. Sa Quezon City lamang po, you will be surprised, Mr. Chair, na yung pong assessment ng kanilang building at saka kanilang machineries and equipment, broadcast equipment, alam po ba ninyo yung assessment period nila? And 40 years pa po ang basis ng assessment nila.
Doble ba?
1973 pa po yung iba, ang pinaka-latest 2004. Meaning to say, hindi po na-assess yung mga yung building nila at saka yung
Ayan.
sa loob, mga equipment, lahat ng ginagamit nila. In other words, assessment mali na po because hindi bumibili naman po sila ng makabagong equipment because of the technology na mabilis po lumaki ngayon.
Okay na ba?
Hindi po napupuntahan ng assessment ng assessor office yung mismong opisina ng ABS-CBN. Kahit na po yung building official, kailangan po siguro patawag natin sila. Hindi sila pinapapasok doon sa mismong planta o istasyon ng ABS-CBN. Kaya hindi po ma-assess yung equipment, yung mga makinarya nila dyan, binibili nila every year. Ang assessment po ay 1973 pa po. Paano natin makukuha ang tamang buwis kapag hindi nila pinapapasok ang assessor sa kanilang opisina? Pati po yung pinakamatas na transmitter. Kailangan po malaman nito, Mr. NTC Commissioner. Yung pong transmitter ng ABS-CBN, wala pong building permit yun.
Glock 45, shout out.
Ito po lahat yung obligation. Kaya po yung ang sinasabi natin dito, kailangan ba payagan natin sa kagad na makasakay sa ibang prangkisa nang hindi po nasa-settle itong napakaraming mga sagutin na ito at obligation na taong bayan na po ang nakakalam nung tayo po ay nagkaroon ng malawakang public hearing dito. Hindi po dapat ganun lang. Kailangan po masettle muna ito. Bakit hindi muna po nila kasi isettle, ayusin, bayaran ang dapat bayaran? Hindi yung makikisakay ka na lang na parang business as usual na lang. Mr.
Tama.
Ito po yung aking
Nakisaw-saw na lang kagad, no?
Nung aking privilege speech. At kung sinasabi po nila, Mr. Chair, na hindi po merger ito, hindi po acquisition, ito po circumvention lamang Mr. Chair. Alam po ba ninyo, yung IRR po ng Republic Act 10667,
Salamat, Infinite Streams.
Competition Commission, under Rule 2, letter K, ang sinasabi po niya sa merger,
Ayan, oh.
merger refers to the joining of two or more entities or to form a new entity, including joint ventures. Alam po ninyo, for purposes of assessing whether or not there is competition, pinalawak po ng IRR ng Philippine Competition ang definition ng merger para hindi po tayo maging technical lang, para walang makapag-circumvent ng batas. Ang nagsasabi pa po ng iba, hindi naman po acquisition yan, sabi niya. Kaya hindi na dapat magpaalam sa Philippine Competition. Hindi po totoo yun. Alam po ninyo, Mr. Chair, it is not only acquisition that will entail control over an entity because ang kahit na po, and dito po sa section 25 po ng Philippine Commission, Competition Commission, sinasabi po rito, Mr. Chair, in determining the control of an entity, the Commission may consider the following. Kung pupunta po tayo sa last sentence noon at idudugtong natin sa letter F, ganito po yung sinasabi. Control exists even when the entity owns one half or less of the voting power of another entity when there exists rights or contracts which confer decisive influence on decisions of the entity. Ang totoo po, doon sa Philippine Competition Commission Act, Mr. Chair, nasa Section 4, dinefine din ang control. Ganon din po, sabi niya, sa letter F, control refers to the ability to substantially influence or direct the action or decision of an entity, whether by contract, agency, or otherwise. Yun po bang pagkakabili ng substantial stocks ng ABS-CBN, ng TV5, hindi po ba nagbibigay ng substantial control yun sapagkat ayon sa bill nila, Mr. Chair, ang ABS-CBN na po ang gagawa ng content. Wala na pong gagawing content ang TV5. At ang TV5 magbo-broadcast na lang. Bakit po nagkaganon? Parang mababiolate po yung Section 10 ng TV5 sapagkat yung rights and privileges na nakuha po dahil nakakuha sila ng control, hindi po nila ipinagpaalam. Nasa Section 10 po yan, Mr. Chair. At yung word na merge dun sa Section 10 po, it was used in its generic sense, Mr. Chair. Hindi lang mo pinag-uusapan yung technicality ng talagang merger or acquisition. Ang sabi po sa definition na ginawa ng Philippine Commission, kahit na po joint venture, pagka-control ang nangingibabaw, kailangan po rin ay makikita rin po natin na control.
Kaya pala sinuspend, no?
Na kinakailangan makialam ng Philippine Commission, Competition Commission. Dahil hindi lamang po dun sa amount ng investment ang pinag-uusapan, Mr. Chair. Bakit po?
Sige, banatan mo, Congressman.
Dahil po kasi sa Section 14 ng Philippine Competition Commission, kailangan pong tingnan ng PCC yung anti-competitive agreements. Nasa Section 14 po yan. Mandate po niya yan. Kailangan din po niya makita kung mayroong abuse of dominant position. Nasa Section 15. Ito pong dalawang sections na to, Mr. Chair, kapag hindi po tinignan ng Philippine Competition Commission, ito pong dalawang ito have the object or effect of substantially preventing, restricting, or lessening competition. Yun po yung gusto nating tingnan. Yung po bang pagkakaroon ng control will have the effect of preventing, restricting, or even lessening competition. Ito po ay alang-alang sa interes ng consumer, Mr. Chair, kaya hindi po maliit na bagay na akala mo bigla na lang sasakay po sa isang may-ari ng prangkisa, kakalimutan lahat ng obligation, hindi na natin titingnan kung yung pagsanib ng dalawang yun makikita mo yung control at ang yung control mawala na magkakaroon na po ng monopolya at ang madidisgrasya rito yung interest ng ating mga consumers. Hanggang dito lamang po, Mr. Chair. Salamat po.
Alright, grabe.
Honorable Marqueta. Okay, before I answer, Commissioner Cordova, we're supposed to present first all the resource persons before we go into the training.
Ma'am Lydia, suspended na nga po. Both ABS-CBN and TV5 decided na i-post nila. So, sila na mismo, kahit meron silang pirmahan na.
Please acknowledge the second resource person we invited in today's hearing.
Yes, Chairman. We have also on board for the Securities and Exchange Commission, General Counsel Romuald Padilla.
Recognized.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, and the honorable members of the House Committee on Legislative Franchise and the Committee on Trade and Industry. Magandang hapon po.
Securities and Exchange Commission.
General Counsel of the Securities and Exchange Commission.
Sa secto, guys.
On August 14, 2022, Mr. Chair, the Commission received a communication from Committee on Legislative Franchise of the Honorable House of Representatives requesting for its comments on the investment agreement and the convertible note agreement between ABS-CBN and TV5. The Commission would like to thank the Honorable House of Representatives for the opportunity to provide information and comment on the subject matter in aid of legislation based on documents filed with and in the custody of the Commission. We would also like to inform the Honorable Committee that we already submitted our position paper earlier. Given the limited time for preparation, the Commission is only able to give initial and preliminary comments on the investment agreement and the convertible note agreement between ABS-CBN and TV5, which are the subject matter of this afternoon's hearing. We therefore beg the kind indulgence and understanding of the Honorable Committee on this matter and respectfully request for additional time to prepare a more comprehensive position paper on the matter subject of this afternoon's hearing, if necessary. Please allow me, Mr. Chair, to start with the first part of my presentation, which is on information about ABS-CBN Corporation on record with the Commission. ABS-CBN is a corporation duly organized.
Sinabi mo ba, Ferrer Domantay? Exactly, tama ka dyan.
Incorporated on July 11, 1946 with SEC registration number 1903. Section 17 of the SRC and its implementing rules and regulations require public corporations to make a full, fair, and accurate disclosure of every material fact to the public through or by filing Form 17C with the Commission. Further, Section 72.1.9 of the SRC-IRR requires a public corporation to include in a registration statement or report such other relevant material information. Now, the records of the Commission show that ABS-CBN filed SEC Form 17C dated August 10, 2022, where it disclosed that its board of directors approved the acquisition or subscription of TV5 shares, which resulted in its execution of these agreements covering the following. First, ABS-CBN acquired 6,459,393 common shares, representing 34.99% of the outstanding capital stock of TV5 for an aggregate subscription price of 2.6 billion. Second, ABS-CBN also subscribed to a convertible note to be issued by TV5 in the principal amount of 1.8 billion. The convertible note is convertible into 5,500,448 additional common shares of TV5 on the maturity date, which is after 8 years from its issuance. In the event that the convertible notes are converted, ABS-CBN will own 49.92% of the outstanding capital stock of TV5. At this point, Mr. Chair, the Commission deems it proper and prudent to provide the honorable committees with a perspective on where the SEC is coming from in relation to the comments and initial assessment on the agreements that we will present this afternoon. In addition to being a company registrar under the revised Corporation Code, the SEC is the country's securities regulator mandated under the Securities Regulation Code to ensure full and fair disclosure about securities and to protect investors, among others. And it is in this context that on August 17, 2022, the SEC, after receiving the Form 17C filed by ABS-CBN, which is a publicly listed company, directed ABS-CBN to submit a copy of the investment agreement and the convertible note agreement to enable the Commission to assess and determine if applicable laws, rules, or regulations were complied with. The submission of the copies of the agreements, which should have been attached to Form 17C, will enable the SEC to evaluate and ensure that ABS-CBN's disclosure are not misleading or inaccurate. And more importantly, it will aid investors in making an informed decision. After an initial evaluation of these agreements, the Commission noted or observed that the disclosure was not full and complete as to the material fact and information provided therein that will enable the investors to arrive at an informed decision relative to ABS-CBN securities. Specifically, the Commission notes that the copies of the investment agreement and the convertible note agreement were not submitted or attached to the Form 17C filed by it. ABS-CBN, however, refused to comply with the directive of the Commission as it only submitted as an attachment to its letter dated August 18, 2022, an executive summary of the subject agreements instead of the copies thereof. The SEC therefore had to send another letter to ABS-CBN on August 19, 2022, reiterating its directive to submit the copies of the agreements in order for the Commission to render a complete evaluation of the transaction.
Chair, point of order. Mr. Chair, point of order.
The Honorable Vice Chair Barsaga is recognized.
Well, I understand that the Securities and Exchange Commission officers are present. Then why is it that Attorney Padilla is the spokesperson of the Securities and Exchange Commission? I think it would be but proper that it will be the Securities and Exchange Commission who shall speak on their findings, on their comments, but not the Philippine Competition Commission.
COMSEC, who the Attorney Padilla is speaking for?
Sir, he is the General Counsel from the Securities and Exchange Commission.
Not
And they
from
are,
the Philippine Competition Commission.
No,
yes,
SEC.
yes, sir. SEC.
SEC.
Okay, so continue. Sorry, I
Okay.
thought that he was representing the Philippine Competition Commission.
Okay, proceed, Attorney Padilla.
Thank you, Your Honor. So, after the SEC therefore had to send another letter to ABS-CBN on August 9, 2022, reiterating its directive to submit the copies of the agreements in order for the Commission to render a complete evaluation of the transaction, consistent with its mandate to ensure compliance with applicable laws, rules, and regulations, and in line also with ABS-CBN's duty to make a full, fair, and accurate disclosure to the public of every material fact. And it was only on August 22, 2022, after the SEC issued a show cause letter, that ABS-CBN submitted redacted copies of the investment agreement and convertible note agreement. So given the very limited time within which to review these agreements, Mr. Chair and honorable members of the committee, the Commission can only provide and present its preliminary comments and assessment on the same as follows. First, there is a need for the Commission to further examine this.
Shout out, Ma'am Carmelita.
To determine whether the shares, notes, and transactions covered therein are exempt from registration under the applicable provisions of the SRC. The conduct of a further investigation will also enable the Commission to assess whether ABS-CBN fully, fairly, and accurately disclosed material facts and events surrounding the agreements. Second, as regards the convertible note agreement, the following were observed as the salient features of the convertible notes that was issued by TV5 to ABS-CBN. The issue price is 1,839,899,856. The convertible note units is 5,500,448 units, free from all encumbrances and document and stamp duties. ABS-CBN, being the note holder, is entitled to payment of interest in each interest payment due. The interest equivalent to the amount per share declared as dividends on TV5 on one common share, with TV5 procuring that such interest shall be paid in cash on the same day of the relevant dividend distribution or payment of any corresponding dividend distribution or payment on the common shares of the issuers. Another feature is that the convertible note is participating and entitled to payment of interest measured by dividends payable on the common shares. However, investor is not entitled to vote, to receive dividend or other rights as stockholder until conversion. Moreover, as a debt, it has relevance to holders of common shares in case of liquidation of the company and runs pari passu with other direct, unconditional, and secured obligations of TV5. Another feature Transfer and assignment of convertible notes shall require prior written consent and may not be paid in favor of restricted persons. Moreover, TV5 has agreed not to issue without prior written consent of ABS-CBN as a note holder any additional conversion of common shares, make any increase, reduction, redemption of share capital, share premium account, or capital redemption reserve, resulting in repayment of money to shareholders or reduce any uncalled liability in respect to capital. Finally, the last feature is that ABS-CBN is entitled to exercise its conversion right, with the convertible note being converted to all or portion of the conversion shares either first on maturity date, which is 8 years after the issuance of the convertible note, or second, on the occurrence of an event of default. Now, Mr. Chair and members of the Honorable Committee, our initial evaluation of the provisions of the agreement enable us to identify the following issues, which, from the perspective of the SEC as a securities regulator, needs to be
Salamat,
addressed by
Mactandim,
the
Tex
SEC,
USA.
a publicly listed company, to the satisfaction of the Commission. First, on the interest rate, a convertible note having features of
Nako, yan na. Oh,
usually provides for an interest rate. The
nagparamdam na
convertible
guys,
note
nagparamdam
agreement
na.
states that interest shall be equivalent to the amount per share declared as dividends by TV5 on one common share, with TV5 procuring that such interest shall be paid in cash on the same date of the relevant dividend distribution or payment of any corresponding dividend distribution or payment on the common shares of the issuers. Now, the payment of interest is dependent upon the declaration of dividends by TV5. It should also be noted that such declaration of dividend is equally dependent on the existence of unrestricted retained earnings. However, looking at the current financial state of TV5, the SEC noted that it incurred net losses of 1.2 billion, 1.6 billion, and 2.5 billion for the years 2021, 2020, and 2019 respectively, based on its 2021 audited financial statements. Moreover, the company reflected a retained earnings deficit of 1.2 billion and 1.6 billion in 2021 and 2020 respectively. So given this set of facts, the Commission sees that the agreement is disadvantageous to ABS-CBN, including its investors, in the sense that it cannot earn interest until TV5 recovers from such deficits, and unless it will have unrestricted retained earnings. Second, on the exercise of the conversion right at maturity date or 8 years after the issuance of the convertible note, the one that the parties can stipulate on the date of the maturity of the debt, the Commission finds it unusual that ABS-CBN agreed to exercise its conversion right only after 8 years, as opposed to being able to exercise such conversion right at a shorter or reasonable period of time. This effectively prevents ABS-CBN from taking advantage of the equity feature of this security instrument, as it is unable to convert the same at the appropriate time, which may result in the acquisition of a higher number of shares. This, again, to the mind of the Commission, is disadvantageous to ABS-CBN and to its shareholders, especially minority investors. Third, the exercise of conversion right is upon occurrence of an event of default. The Commission finds it unusual that ABS-CBN accepted and agreed to exercise a right to convert all outstanding convertible notes into shares on or after the occurrence of an event of default, instead of deciding to remain as a creditor of TV5, where it can demand payment of the amount due and enjoy preference together with other creditors. This gave the Commission an impression that for ABS-CBN, being a shareholder of TV5 is more important than being able to collect a debt from a defaulting entity. This is a concern on the part of the SEC, who is mandated to protect the investing public, which includes the investors of ABS-CBN, a publicly listed company. Fourth, the ownership of ABS-CBN of 49.92% of TV5's total voting and outstanding capital stock. The exercise by ABS-CBN to convert all the convertible note into shares under the convertible note agreement will, together with the initial investor shares which it acquired under the investment agreement, will result in ABS-CBN holding or owning 49.92% of the total voting and outstanding capital stock of TV5. The resulting capital and shareholding structure of TV5 after closing and conversion of the investment agreement and convertible note agreement will make both MediaQuest Group of TV5 and ABS-CBN owners of TV5 with equal percentage of 49.2%. We see this, or the SEC sees this as a potential risk for TV5, especially in relation to its compliance with the 30% public ownership provision in its franchise law, as will be explained in a while. Finally, Mr. Chair and members, honorable members of the committees, please allow us to present our comments on the agreements in relation to the legislative franchise of TV5, which is RA number 11320. Section 11 of RA 11320 requires TV5 to offer to the public at least 30% or a higher percentage that may hereafter be provided by law of its outstanding capital stock in any securities exchange in the Philippines within 5 years from the commencement of its operations. Now, pursuant to the investment agreement, ABS-CBN acquired 6,459,393 common shares, representing 34.99% of the outstanding capital stock of TV5 for an aggregate subscription price of 2.16 billion. Moreover, ABS-CBN also subscribed to a convertible note to be issued by TV5 with a principal amount of 1.8 billion. The convertible note is convertible into 5,500,448 additional common shares of TV5 after 8 years from its issuance, which will result in the ownership by ABS-CBN of 49.92% of the total voting and outstanding capital stock of TV5. Now, based on the 2021 General Information Sheet of TV5, it has an authorized capital stock of 20 million, divide 18 million of which is common and 2 million of which is preferred. And out of the 10 million, 10 million of the 18 million common shares is already subscribed, thus leaving only 8 million unsubscribed shares. The remaining 8 million unsubscribed is sufficient to enable the acquisition of 6,459,393 TV5 shares by ABS-CBN under the first agreement, which is the investment agreement, and will, however, leave TV5 with only 1,540,607 unsubscribed common shares. However, with the implementation of the convertible note agreement, TV5's remaining unsubscribed common shares of 1,540,607 will no longer be sufficient to cover the conversion of convertible notes into of 5,500,448 additional common shares upon the exercise by ABS-CBN the said option. In such case, and considering that under the investment agreement and convertible note agreement, ABS-CBN will ultimately be holding or owning 49.92% of the total voting and outstanding capital stock of TV5, which TV5 agreed to. TV5 then will have to explain to the Congress how it plans to or comply with the 30% public ownership requirement given the available shares. In addition, Mr. Chair and honorable members of the committee, It should also be pointed out that Section 10 of RA 11320 prohibits TV5 from selling, leasing, transferring, granting the usufruct of, or assigning its franchise or the rights and privileges freely granted without the prior approval of the Congress. And is
Yun.
obliged to inform the Congress of any sale, lease, transfer, grant of usufruct, or assignment. In relation to the investment agreement, while the SEC is of the view that there was no merger of TV5 and ABS-CBN under the provisions of the revised corporation code, the Commission suggests, however, that the matter of controlling interest be looked into by the Congress. And in this regard, the Commission will defer to the Congress on what constitutes controlling interest in determining whether there is a need for its prior approval as mandated in its franchise law. The SEC would also like to point out, however, that under Rule 3.1.8 of the SRC-IRR, control is defined as the power to determine the financial and operating policies of an entity in order to benefit from its activities. And it is presumed to exist when a parent entity owns directly or through subsidiaries and associates more than 50% of the voting power of an entity. And it also exists when the parent entity owns 50% or less of the voting power of an entity, but has any of the following powers. And 3.1.8.3 provides power to appoint or remove the majority of the members of the board of directors or equivalent governing body. And 3.1.8.4 provides the power to cast the majority of votes at the meetings of the board of directors or equivalent body. In closing, Mr. Chair and honorable members of the committee, we would like to reiterate that the foregoing comments and inputs of the SEC are products of an initial evaluation, given the limited time, and was made solely in the context of the Commission's mandate as securities regulator, tasked to ensure compliance with applicable laws and regulations. The Commission respectfully submits that the further thorough examination of the provision of these agreements, including all the relevant attachments and the documents, must be made. Until then, and subject to the explanation that we provided by ABS-CBN on the matters that were raised by the Commission cannot make as yet any final determination on whether any violation was made by ABS-CBN when it executed the investment agreement and convertible notes agreement. Thank you, Mr. Chair and honorable members of the committee. Good afternoon.
Chair, good afternoon.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, good afternoon. This is Congrida Robes.
Yes, Congrida.
Yeah. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. First, I'd like to thank all the speakers for joining us today. May request for the position paper of the Securities Exchange Commission. So, maaral din natin ang mga members yung kanilang stand towards this issue being tackled today. Yun lang po, Mr. Chair.
Yes, I just for everyone that the committee just today we received the position paper from SEC. And I direct the COMSEC to please send it to the individual emails of all.
Ako nawala. Pass forward.
The third resource person, COMSEC.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have from the Philippine Competition Commission, Commissioner Johannes Benjamin Bernabe. Your Honor.
Go. Is he here?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Attorney Bernabe. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and a pleasant afternoon to all the honorable members of the Committee on Trade, Industry, and Committee on Legislative Franchises, including, of course, their respective chairpersons. Philippine Competition Commission focuses on the impact on competition and consumer welfare of the transaction. So it is really with regard to the acquisition of shares by ABS-CBN in TV5 that the mandate of the Competition Commission is focused on. Now, we submitted a position paper earlier, I believe yesterday, to the Honorable Chair and the Secretariats, and I hope that that will be circulated as well to all the members of the committees herein present. We also have had no ample opportunity to look at the details of the transaction, primarily because up till now, ABS-CBN and TV5 have not notified the Commission of their transaction. Under the law and under our rules, they do have 30 days within which to notify us if the transaction happens to be a notifiable transaction, meaning that it meets the thresholds provided for in the law, the IRR, and other relevant legislation. So we have two issues before us as far as the Commission is concerned. First is whether the transaction is notifiable under the law and under our rules. And secondly, regardless of whether it is notifiable, and I will explain the reasons for this broad concept later, regardless of whether it is notifiable, whether the transaction is likely to result in a substantial lessening of competition that we can review and thereafter prohibit or subject to conditions. So if you will allow me, Mr. Chair, I'd like to discuss the first issue, which is the notifiability of the transaction. Unlike the SEC, we do not have a copy of the investment agreement and the other related documents. What we have are publicly available information, which have already been articulated before the committees. Based on these publicly available information, it appears to be that the transaction is not notifiable. It does not meet the transaction value under the Bayanihan to Recover as One Act or Bayanihan 2. If you will recall, under this law, Congress required the PCC for a period of 2 years or until September 15 or thereabouts 2022 to review only mergers or acquisitions with a transaction value of more than 50 billion pesos. This means that either of the parties must have assets or revenues in the preceding year of more than 50 billion. This is what we refer to as the size of party test. And secondly, that generally, because this transaction is a transaction within the Philippines, that the entity to be acquired must have assets or revenues in excess as well of 50 billion pesos. This is known as the size of transaction test. Now, additionally, the requirement under the PCA where the transaction involves an acquisition of shares remains applicable. That is that the transaction must result in more than 35% of the voting shares being transferred to the acquiring entity. So, with regard to the present transaction, insofar as the size of party test, the aggregate value of the Lopez Group assets in the Philippines amounts to approximately 456 billion pesos, which is in excess of the 50 billion threshold under the Bayanihan to Recover as One Act. Meanwhile, PLDT's aggregate value of assets in the Philippines amounts to 525 billion pesos, more or less. And therefore, the size of party test is met. With regard to the second test, the size of transaction, TV5's value of assets in the Philippines only amounts to 7 billion pesos, which is below the 50 billion peso threshold. And as the SEC mentioned earlier, their revenues in the past 3 years have been in the red, meaning that their revenues have been in the form of losses, and these range from 2.5 billion pesos to 1.2 billion pesos in the last 3 years. Now, in the same vein, the transaction also relates only to acquisition of shares that would result in ownership of 34.99% of voting shares. And therefore, not meeting the requirement of the acquisition of at least 35% of the voting
Tama ka dyan,
shares
Giovanni
in order
Domingo.
to qualify under this size of transaction test. And therefore, under this second test, it appears that the transaction is not notifiable. Now, even if it is not notifiable, because it does not meet the thresholds provided under the law and under our IRR and under Bayanihan to Recover as One Act, it does not preclude the parties from voluntarily notifying the PCC under Section 3.2 of the PCC Rules on Merger Procedure within 30 days from the execution of their investment agreement. The Commission, in its discretion, may give due course to such voluntary notifications, subject to the review period of a total of 135 days. 45 days for phase 1, and if there is an indication of a substantial restriction on competition, which necessitates a deeper analysis, we can have another 90 days for a phase 2 review. Now, suppose the parties do not voluntarily notify the Commission. Can the PCC conduct a review of the transaction on its own initiative or motu proprio? The answer is yes. Section 16 of the Philippine Competition Act gives the Commission broad powers to review mergers and acquisitions based on factors it deems relevant. Section 13 of our Rules on Merger Procedures further provides the trigger when this motu proprio review may be exercised. That is when the PCC has reasonable grounds to believe that the transaction is likely to substantially prevent, restrict, or lessen competition in the market. As an update on this and in the exercise of our authority, the Commission and Bank has directed its Mergers and Acquisitions Office, the unit under the PCC, which conducts merger review, to make an initial assessment of whether the transaction is likely to substantially prevent, restrict, or lessen competition, and as such, whether the Commission has reasonable grounds to initiate a motu proprio review. Note that these reasonable grounds is the legal standard by which we can initiate a motu proprio review, and therefore it is important that we get a report and a recommendation that the Commission and Bank can act upon based on the initial assessment of our Mergers and Acquisitions Office. Now, suppose either the parties voluntarily notify or the Commission undertakes a motu proprio review of the transaction, what will we be looking at? Well, as Congressman Marcoleta mentioned earlier, we will be looking at whether the transaction has the object or effect, or in more common terms, layman terms, is likely to substantially lessen competition. Now, we look at, from a competition perspective, two dimensions. These two dimensions are, first, are the parties competitors? Are they operating in the same segment of the value chain? And if they are, what these markets are, what these lines of businesses in which the acquiring and acquired entities compete, and whether the resulting concentration of market shares in these markets will cause a substantial lessening of competition. So we have had an initial look at the lines of businesses that may indicate a potential competition or overlap between ABS-CBN and TV5. And we noted that whereas TV5, prior to the investment agreement and prior to the operationalization of that investment agreement, is also involved in content production and content distribution and programming, this overlaps with ABS-CBN and its subsidiaries' main business now of content production, development, distribution, and programming. This may involve entertainment shows, talk shows, documentaries, news, and films. Now, there is a parallel transaction involving Signal's acquisition of Sky Cable. And we all know that the parent companies of these two companies are also the companies involved in the transaction under review by the committee today. Now, moving on, the second dimension that we examine from a competition perspective is, apart from the segments in the value chain where these entities may be competing, we also look at whether or not they are actually suppliers and consumers for certain products. Meaning, do they have a vertical relationship such that the inputs of one entity are derived from the output of the other entity. So in this kind of relationship, we look at the vertical effects of that kind of input and output relationship. If ABS-CBN is a content developer, will its output in terms of content and shows and all that now be limited to TV5 under the investment agreement? Will it now no longer be available in the other media platforms through which they were previously viewed, whether these are in traditional media or in social media platforms? And therefore, if this is going to happen, will there be less choice for consumers to view these programs? And part of the competition considerations is to ensure that consumer welfare is not prejudiced by any transaction that comes before the review of the Commission. Now, is it also possible that this content, by being provided to TV5, will now allow TV5 to compete more effectively against incumbents in the TV and radio broadcasting space?
Shout out Irish.
When ABS-CBN was closed in 2020, its other competitor in the market for TV and radio broadcasting, GMA7, assumed dominance of the broadcasting services industry. Why do we say this? Well, when ABS-CBN and GMA7 were both operating, they had between 35 to 40% of the market share each for TV and radio broadcasting, or at the very least for TV broadcasting. When ABS-CBN was shut down, there was a diversion of those who patronized and used ABS-CBN. There was a diversion in favor of GMA7, such that the market share of GMA7, depending on the entities which were reviewing market share analysis for this sector, ranged from 53.6% to 65%. So, using the presumptive evidence that we can accord to such percentages, as far as we are concerned, GMA7 became the dominant incumbent insofar as TV and radio broadcasting services are concerned. Now, with ABS-CBN buying into TV5 and providing the content that TV5 apparently needs, would TV5 now be able to impose a competitive pressure on GMA7's dominance, such that it effectively fosters competition in the market? These are considerations that we have to look into. And the parallel transaction involving the acquisition of shares by Signal and Sky Cable, apart from having its
yes,
own
tama,
impact
Ma'am
on
Sheila Maceda,
competition within the market for cable TV or satellite TV, in and of itself adds further complications to the examination of the impact on competition of ABS-CBN's investment in TV5. Now, as I said earlier, these are questions which we will have to address in the context of a review, whether triggered by a voluntary notification by the parties or by the Commission motu proprio exercising its initiative or power to conduct reviews of mergers which may have an impact on competition. We cannot answer these questions and issues now. To do so would be premature. We would have to do economic analysis, market analysis, and examine the legal, commercial, and economic context in which these parties operate, and able to be in a position to make findings and conclude on whether or not the transaction will substantially lessen competition in the market. Now, a question is raised by some on whether the first issue on non-notification to the PCC of the acquisition is a ground for the transaction's prohibition and cancellation. I can only point to Section 17 of the
Kaya kinabahan yung TV5 eh.
where it says that agreements
Delikado pala sila.
violation of the requirements
Sayang yung
notified,
prangkisa rin nila. Nako,
where
nako,
they
nako,
are
nako.
so required will result in the agreement being considered void and the parties subject to an administrative fine of between 1% to 5% of the value of the transaction. However, as I mentioned earlier, at least based on a preliminary evaluation by our Mergers and Acquisitions Office, the transaction does not seem to be notifiable. Now, at the end point, if we conduct a review, and it so happens that we find that the transaction substantially lessens competition in the market, what can the PCC do? First, under the law, we can prohibit the transaction. Alternatively, we can also subject the transaction to conditions to remedy the effect on competition in the market, the negative effect on competition in the market. And in this case, parties can also come forward and voluntarily offer commitments, as we call them, to remedy that anti-competitive impact. Again, to emphasize, the parties have not contacted the PCC about this deal. We do not have a copy of the investment agreement, and we are basing what we are initially presenting before the Commission on publicly available data and the information that we have called as part of our initial assessment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair.
Ayan na, si Dante Marcoleta.
Commissioner Bernabe. So now we proceed. That's the third resource person. So we now can proceed to the interpretation. Meron na po 5 nagparista. The Honorable Marcoleta, then followed by the Honorable Lagman, then followed by the Honorable Teves, then the Honorable Vice Chair Parsaga, and the Honorable Anthony Godes. Kung meron po magpaparista, please inform the Secretary. The Chair
Marcoleta.
The Honorable Rodante.
Shout out, Ma'am Lorelai.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, makinig tayo.
Question to the Commissioner of the PCC. He mentioned the 2 kinds of tests. One is the notification test. While he mentioned Section 17, I think he failed to explain to us that parties to the merger or acquisition agreement referred to wherein the value of the transaction exceeds 1 billion pesos are subject to notification. It is already, as mentioned by him, in Section 17. And based on publicly available information, I think the value of the acquired outstanding stock of TB5, Mr. Chair, is over 2 billion pesos. Is this not a basis of notification, Mr. Commissioner, considering that the threshold value here is only 1 billion pesos?
May I answer, Mr. Chair?
You may answer.
Thank you,
Sige,
Mr. Chair.
sagutan kayo dyan.
Honorable Marcoleta, there is a provision in the Bayanihan Act which increased for 2 years, for a 2-year period, the value of transactions that may be reviewed by the PCC to 50 billion pesos. That will expire on September 15, if I'm not mistaken. But for now, we cannot review any transaction which falls below a value of 50 billion pesos. And this is because the House of Representatives and the Senate passed that law in 2020.
I know that, Mr. Chair, but considering Section 17, when it mentions a threshold amount of 1 billion pesos, where agreements can be prohibited if it exceeds 1 billion pesos, I suppose, why did you not look into that, considering that the publicly available information already suggested that the acquisition of substantial sales of TV5 exceeded more than 2 billion pesos? This is the point here, because Section 17 is about compulsory notification. That is only my point. If you can explain that, because it talks about 1 billion pesos only.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Please proceed.
Yes. The Bayanihan 2 Act precisely modifies or suspends the operation of that threshold provided in Section 17, Your Honor. So if we proceed to review this transaction, or if we compel ABS-CBN and TV5 to notify us, we would be in violation of Bayanihan 2. But just to clarify, Mr. Chair, even if this transaction is not notifiable, we can initiate on our own a motu proprio review of the transaction, but we have to have a reasonable basis. And that reasonable basis will be something that we will discuss and deliberate upon when our Mergers and Acquisitions Office comes back to the Commission and Bank with the report and recommendation by the first or second week of September.
Mr. Chair, the reasonable basis that the good commissioner is talking about is the definition of control itself, which appears under Section 4 of the PCC Charter. And it was also exemplified also under Section 25 on control of an equity, where control also exists even when an entity owns 1/2 or less of the voting power of another entity, when there are 3 conditions here, Mr. Commissioner. And the last one, I will emphasize that, letter F, when there exists rights or contracts which confer decisive influence on the decisions of the entity. This is where you should come in. Because if that control, even if by way of stocks it's even lesser or acquisition even lesser, but it is not the question of value only that manifests control, Mr. Chair and Mr. Commissioner, because this particular provision of your charter elicits conditions where control can come in. You made mention about vertical merger earlier, which is a condition between companies that are along the same supply chain, and this is correct. But maybe you should also consider that these 2 merging companies or companies that are now trying to be in partnership, they're also exercising horizontal merger, Mr. Chair, because horizontal merger is a condition between companies that directly compete with each other. So you will see, Mr. Commissioner, it's not only vertical situation that is involved here. It is horizontal merger as well, because of the control that ABS-CBN might play here. Can you imagine? ABS-CBN will be the one supplying the contents already, and TV5 will not do that anymore. And so it is like giving away your right to produce contents, and it is only ABS-CBN who is going to do that. In other words, when ABS-CBN lost its franchise to do that, to produce contents, we are now giving it another vehicle to just that. So there are so many aspects that we should review here. And competition-wise, Mr. Commissioner, it is of course your bounden duty to look into the consumer welfare. It is very obvious that the dominance of ABS-CBN in content will again be a forceful factor here that you should also consider. And your mandate is very clear that any anti-competitive agreement should be looked into, and even the abuse of dominant position should be looked into if the object or the effect of which might lessen or even prevent competition. Ito yung dapat nating tingnan. Not only on the issue of notification, maybe they have their ways to evade that and circumvent that, but the ultimate analysis will be on whether or not the combination between the two networks will stifle competition and it will not inure to the benefit of the greater consumers. Mr. Chair, Mr. Commissioner. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, may I offer a quick reaction to the Honorable Congressman?
Go.
Please do.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Congressman Marcoleta, for your very perceptive insights. I would limit myself to two issues you have raised. The first one is on the matter of control and whether that is sufficient to vest in us jurisdiction. I think that the question of control is what we look at for purposes of considering this transaction an acquisition. Okay. It is not a merger from our perspective, but it is an acquisition because there is a purchase of shares. Whether or not it breaches the 35% threshold or not, it is an acquisition of shares. The 35% threshold only relates to the question of whether it should be notified. And as you noticed, ABS-CBN only pegged its purchase of shares at up to 34.99%, below the 35%. Now, whatever the reason is, that is beyond what we would wish to comment on at this point. But definitely, the reference to the matter of vestiges or badges of control, to our mind, qualifies the transaction as an acquisition. Now, the second thing is the fact that it is an acquisition. Does it already form a reasonable basis for us to initiate a motu proprio review? If I may clarify, the basis for conducting a motu proprio review will have to also include an initial assessment of whether the transaction is likely to cause a substantial lessening of competition based on a very cursory examination of the facts. And that is something that we are in the process of doing. And the determination of a substantial lessening of competition is an economic analysis at the end of the day. But we are expediting it so that we can have a recommendation on whether or not to open a motu proprio review of the transaction if the parties do not choose to voluntarily notify same. On the second issue with regard to vertical effects and horizontal mergers, you're absolutely right, Congressman Marcoleta. We are going to look at both. We are going to look at the markets where ABS-CBN and TV5 are competitors, and I enumerated in part what those are. You are also correct that we are going to look at the vertical effects of the merger, the fact that they are in a supply chain relationship, one developing content and the other one using that content for purposes of broadcasting. Now, I mentioned earlier that the parallel transaction of Signal acquiring Sky also adds further complications. And we will be looking at what we call as the conglomerate effects of this acquisition. Conglomerate because these are conglomerates. And that is a unique feature of the Philippine economy, that many of our entities are part of conglomerates. And we will be looking at that as well if we conduct a review. So rest assured, Your Honor, that we will be looking at all of these matters very carefully, including what may result out of the transaction as a possible dominance of ABS-CBN in terms of content development, and how it may be relating to a foreclosure of other markets for its airing or for the sourcing of content by TV5 itself. So we will be looking at these matters, Your Honor.
You may look into also market extension merger, Mr. Commissioner, and product extension merger. Thank you.
We will do so, Your Honor. Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Okay.
just
So
a
now,
clarification.
yes.
Well,
Yes, no, Vice Chair Barsaga.
well, I was present even at the time we started the hearing. And I just remember, I'm not sure whether or not our source persons have taken their oath. So I would like to verify whether or not the source persons have already taken their oath before our committee.
Shown to that they have not taken their oath. Do you wish that?
Source persons be required to take their oath.
Okay, on the motion of the Honorable Vice Chair Barsaga, may I direct the COMSEC to please administer the oath to our resource persons.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, may I ask the resource persons from the Philippine Competition Commission, the Securities Exchange Commission, and from the NTC to please raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth before these joint congressional inquiries to help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
So thank you very much, COMSEC. So are we done, Honorable Marcoleta? Tapos na po kayo, so we can move to the next interpreter.
Looks like.
The Honorable Marcoleta. So I don't think he's online. So now we can proceed, no?
Mr. Chair, pagbigyan ko si Congressman Barsaga, siya na muna.
Okay, ang susunod na kalista si the Honorable Lagman, listahan. So,
okay.
the Honorable Lagman is second.
Okay.
Ayan na guys. Ayan na. Ayan na.
Honorable Lagman, you have the floor.
Thank you.
Ito na mga kapsat.
Before I start with my interpellation, may I be allowed to read into the records my letter to Speaker Romualdez, dated 22 August 2022, which would really set the tone and preliminary joint issues.
Kuha ako ng tubig guys, water lang. Mahaba ito guys, mahaba ito si Lagman.
Please proceed. You have 20 minutes for your interpretation, including that joint statement.
Honorable Martin K. Romualdez, Speaker, House of Representatives, Batasan Complex, Quezon City. Dear Speaker Romualdez, I write on behalf of my constituents and concerned citizens about the looming House investigation, which may result in the derogation of press freedom and free speech, the bedrock of democratic governments. I refer to the recently announced transaction between TV5 Network, Inc. and ABS-CBN Corporation, which has generated some innuendos which must be clarified and corrected. First, the deal is not a merger, where one entity absorbs another or two entities fuse to form a new one, as defined by the Philippine Competition Act, or RA number 10667. TV5 and ABS-CBN remain separate and independent juridical entities. Neither does acquisition obtain as defined in Section 4 of the Philippine Constitution Act, because ABS-CBN does not acquire control of TV5. Second, the contract is an investment agreement wherein ABS-CBN invests in TV5 by putting in 2.61 billion in exchange of 34.99% of TV5's voting stock, and an additional 1.84 billion in convertible note, which can be exchanged for additional voting shares only after 8 years, and will increase ABS-CBN's stake in TV5 to only 49.92%, or less than a controlling absolute majority. And this is still in Kuwait, or subject to future events, and also subject to requisite approvals. Third, there is no franchise issue. Section 10 of TV5's renewed franchise under Republic Act number 11320 is not violated by the transaction because there is no sale, lease, transfer, or grant of the use of frac or assignment of TV5's franchise to ABS-CBN. Moreover, there is no merger or transfer of controlling interest in TV5. Fourth, the transaction of 4.45 billion is less than the transaction value threshold of 50 billion under the Bayanihan to Recover as One Act, or Republic Act number 11494. Consequently, the said transaction is exempt from the compulsory notification and approval by the Philippine Competition Commission. Fifth, Memorandum Order number 003-06-2022 of the National Telecommunication Commission is constitutionally infirm, arbitrary, and vague for the following reasons. One, it violates the constitutional right of TV5 and ABS-CBN to enter into a contract which is not contrary to law, morals, good customs, public order, or public policy. There is no rhyme, no reason to disqualify an entity from contracting simply because it has outstanding obligations to the government. Two, the NTC memorandum is a usurpation of the legislative power. It adds and imposes a restriction on a franchisee like TV5, which is not in its legislative franchise. Three, the NTC memorandum is arbitrary because it discriminates against entities which have got outstanding obligations to the national government and local government. Unquote. It is also akin to a class legislation which infringes on the Constitution. Four, the NTC memorandum is vague because it lacks the requisite standards for determining what is the nature, extent, and status of the so-called quote outstanding obligations. Six, the TV5 ABS-CBN transaction enhances fair competition in the television and broadcast industry. Without a franchise, ABS-CBN ceased to be a major player in the industry. TV5 has not achieved major player status. One television network presently dominates the industry. With the recent infusion of ABS-CBN investment in TV5, the playing field approximates leveling. Healthy competition will ensue as networks would compete for revenues and viewership. Competition also improves quality of shows, news coverage, commentary, and entertainment. Not even the current dominant network expressed opposition to the transaction. Seven, in the subject joint venture agreement, ABS-CBN, which doesn't have a franchise, creates and produces content, while TV5, which has the franchise, broadcasts the shows. Mr. Speaker, there is absolutely nothing wrong with that arrangement. What is definitely errant is when authorities trample on the freedom of expression and of the press. Thank you for your kind consideration and appropriate action. But it will yours, Edsel Silagman. Joint Chairman, thank you for giving me this opportunity to place on record the subject letter. And I am certain the Joint Chairman will not allow the respective committees to be used to trample press freedom and free expression. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and may I proceed with my interpellation.
Please proceed.
May I request from Commissioner Cordoba, or may I know why he has not brought with him a copy of this memorandum order number 003-06-2020.
The Honor NTC Commissioner Cordova is recognized.
We have a copy, Your Honors, and we will furnish this to the Honorable Committee, Your Honors.
The committee should have, joint committee should have been furnished well ahead of this memorandum, because the memorandum is only a one-page memorandum. Is that correct, Mr. Commissioner?
Yes, Honors, it's one-page.
And it is signed solely by Commissioner Cordoba. Is that correct?
That is correct, Your Honors.
And maybe know what is the date of this memorandum order?
Your Honors, it's Mr. Chairman, it's dated 23 June 2022.
Why it until now it has been on the website of the Commission?
Actually, Your Honors, what we did was we sent it to all the broadcasters by email, Your Honors. Furnish also the KBP. That is the industry organization of all broadcasters.
May we know, Mr. Commissioner, if there is any law, decree, or ordinance which would disqualify a person, whether natural or juridical, from entering into a contract simply because it has standing obligations with the government.
Actually, Your Honors, the reason why we issued this memorandum is to enforce compliance of obligations of existing entities. Because, Your Honor, I believe, for example, when you talk about the sale of real property, the Register of Deeds will not register the transfer of the property if the real property taxes are not paid, and the owner of the property is not able to get clearance from the Bureau of Internal Revenue. So, to enforce compliance with the payment of taxes and other obligations of entities, and to help the national government, considering that there is a need for collection, especially because of COVID, kaya po we issued this memorandum order, Your Honor.
That answered the question, Mr. Chairman. And I think the NTC is not a general collection arm of the government. My question is there a law, decree, or ordinance which disqualifies a person, whether natural or juridical, from entering into a contract simply because it has outstanding obligations with the national and local governments?
Your Honors, we are in the position, it is our position that a franchise is a privilege, Your Honor. So we can impose additional obligations on part of the franchise holders or owners when they enter into contracts, Your Honor.
We will go to that later, but the answer is there is no law. Is that correct, Mr. Chairman?
Your Honors, I think it's the general principle po that you have to first pay your obligations with the government to be in good standing as a corporation or as an entity before you can enter into contracts, especially in this case with the franchisee, which was given by Congress, Your Honors.
Is that policy you are saying rendered in black and white in any statute or issuance?
I'm not aware. I'm not aware, Your Honors.
As a matter of fact, under the Civic Code, there are only 3 kinds of persons who cannot give consent to a contract. 1, unemancipated minors. 2, insane or demented persons. or deaf mutes who do not know how to write. And this is under Article 1327 of the new Civil Code. And you don't have to confirm this, Mr. Commissioner, because that is the law.
Yes.
Now, can a memorandum order of the NTC amend the franchise issued by Congress?
Actually, Your Honors, it can add obligations, Your Honor, especially since that is a privilege granted by the state. And in this case, the parties are franchise holders, and they get a permit from the national government for the use of the frequencies which is owned by the national government. So as part of that contract with the government, we can put in obligations para po maging po sila in good standing sa national government, Your Honor.
Obligations in addition to the basic restrictions and limitations imposed in the franchise by the Congress of the Philippines. Is that correct?
We're coming from the general principles po of yung pagbigay namin ng property of the state to them, which is the frequencies, and they use it for commercial purposes. Then we can include obligations in or conditions in giving them that right, that privilege to use those frequencies, Your Honors.
Well, I beg to disagree. In your memorandum 00306/2022,
Sinabi mo ba, Sir Leonardo?
number says, in addition to the conditions and limitations provided in the grantee's legislative franchise on mergers and acquisitions, I don't think the NTC has the power to amend or impose new restrictions to a legislative franchise. This is a derogation of the legislative power, and we cannot allow Congress, we cannot allow NTC to make a mockery of the franchises issued by the Congress. I suppose
Via Zoom to, Ma'am Sheila.
Commissioner, you should be able
Via
to
Zoom.
review the extent of your authority. Just for the sake of clarity, your memorandum order consists of only 4 paragraphs. Is that correct?
Nako, nakawala ng signal
Do you have a copy of your memorandum, Mr. Commissioner?
Yes, Your Honor. I have a copy, Your Honor.
Could you just refer to your copy and confirm that it is consisting of only 4 paragraphs from the opening statement of in the interest of the service up to approval prior to the consummation?
Yes, Your Honors. The first paragraph would be the introduction, Your Honors, and then the provisions would be 3 numbers, Your Honors.
Well, Mr. Chair, I reserve my other questions because I have a question to the Philippine Competition Commission. Can I proceed, Mr. Chair?
Please proceed. 5 minutes. You have 5 more minutes. Please proceed.
Okay. Well, under the bayanihan to recover as one, the 4.45 billion transaction between ABS and CBN does not exceed or does not even reach the transaction value of 50 billion. Is that correct?
That is correct, Your Honor.
In other words, this transaction is exempt from the compulsory notification and approval by the Philippine Constitution Commission up to September 15, 2022. Is that correct?
That's correct, Your Honor.
Now, my question is, when this provision expires on September 15, 2022, will agreements which did not exceed the threshold of 50 billion be required to compulsorily notify and such agreement be approved by the Philippine Competition Commission, or it will not retroact?
Our position is it will not retroact. The applicable law at that time will be Bayanihan 2, and transactions such as this which were dated August will not need to be compulsorily notified, Your Honor.
Thank you. With respect to the motu proprio review by the Philippine Competition Commission, I was reading the enabling statute, and it refers to mergers and acquisitions. Is that correct?
That is correct, Your Honor.
Okay. And there is a definite definition under Section 4 of what is a merger and what is an acquisition. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And you are bound by the parameters and limitations of this definition. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Now, Mr. Chairman, I would reserve further questions when the Philippine report. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner.
Thank you very much, the Honorable Edsel Lagman, for your questions to our first persons. Now, we have the Honorable Tevez. I don't see him anymore. So now we proceed to the Honorable Vice Chair, the Honorable Barsaga. You are recognized.
Maraming salamat, Chairman. Well, I would be asking some clarificatory questions to our General Counsel of the Securities and Exchange Commission, Attorney Padilla. Is Attorney Padilla still around? Attorney Padilla?
Attorney Padilla, SEC, are you around?
Yes, Your Honor. Yes, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Please speak closer to the microphone. We can't hear you. Nag-echo. Okay. The Honorable Padilla.
Ang layo kayo ng camera nila.
Attorney, do I get you right when you stated that what was submitted to you, to your office by ABS-CBN was merely the executive summary?
Your Honor, initially po, what was submitted to us in acting on our initial directive was an executive summary.
Okay, so you just received an executive summary. When did you receive that? More or less?
More we received that Monday this week.
Monday this week?
August 22.
August 22. The executive summary.
Yes,
the executive summary will not be sufficient for you to make an assessment of the entire deal. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
So what did you do?
Your Honor, we requested for the actual copies of the agreement, Your Honor.
And was that request followed by ABS-CBN?
Initially, Your Honor, they declined because of confidentiality issues. However, Your Honor, after the MSRD or the Market Securities Regulation Department issued the show cause, they complied eventually.
So in other words, you have to issue a cost order in order to compel or convince ABS-CBN to give you a copy of the investment certificate. Will that be a correct appreciation?
That is correct, Your Honor, based on our records, Your Honor.
And insofar as the implication of confidentiality of the transaction, do you agree with the position of ABS-CBN?
With all due respect, Your Honor, we do not agree because as regulators, we are mandated to protect investors, and we can only do that effectively if we are able to review fully the complete documents, Your Honor.
And can you think of any reason why ABS-CBN does not want to submit the investment agreement between ABS-CBN and TV5 on grounds of confidentiality?
Your Honor, what I'm thinking right now is that they would be invoking a provision in the agreement on confidentiality. But it is our position, Your Honor, that the provisions in the contract on confidentiality should not be made to apply to the government.
Okay. So in short, as a lawyer, it is your position, and I agree with you, that if there is a confidentiality provision in the agreement, that is applicable only between the parties and their successors and interests, but not applicable to the government, especially if the agency is a regulatory body like the Securities and Exchange Commission.
That is correct, Your Honor.
Attorney Padilla, so when did you actually receive the entire agreement?
Your Honor, we received it August 22 po.
August 22. Okay. You just give us a chronological sequence of the events. And you have made a very detailed presentation, notwithstanding the fact that you stated that you received it only on August 22, and you have only a period of 2 days to prepare. My request is that, do you have a printed copy of what you have stated a while ago?
Yes, Your Honor. We submitted a position paper already, Your Honor. I can also provide you with a copy of my statement to the Honorable Committee, Your Honor.
Just request the COMSEC to provide us either with a soft copy of hard copy of your position paper. And according to you, you will be making a further scrutiny of the investment agreement.
That is correct, Your Honor. That is correct.
Can you also furnish the committee of the copies of the investment certificate and its annexes?
We will do that. We will do that.
And how long can you do that?
Your Honor, we can submit it tomorrow, Your Honor.
And how many pages are there?
Your Honor, makapal po, Your Honor. The investment agreement, main contract is composed of 24 pages, exclusive of the attachments. While
how many pages are there in the attachment?
But we will provide you with the attachment. And the convertible note agreement, at any rate, Your Honor, walang pagination po, walang pagination dito. We will undertake to provide the honorable committee with a copy tomorrow po, first thing in the morning.
Okay, maraming salamat. Then I will go to Attorney Bernabe. Attorney Bernabe?
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Magandang hapon, Attorney Bernabe. You stated a while ago that up to the present, you do not have a copy of the investment agreement between TV5 and ABS-CBN. Is that correct, Mr. Chair?
Your Honor.
Hindi, gawa ng yung colas ko yung kilay ko lalagyan.
Ano daw?
Ako salamin doon.
May I ask, there are mics on. Can you please
Mag-mute kayo pag naka-zoom, no? Pag di kayo nagsasalita.
Thank you.
Attorney Bernabe, please.
Attorney Bernabe, you have the floor. Attorney Bernabe.
Yes, I affirm that the statement that we have not received a copy of the investment agreement is correct, Your Honor.
Panyero, I was a little bit impressed with your comments, notwithstanding that you do not have a copy or have not seen a copy of the investment certificate, you were able to discuss in details. And according to you, you just rely on newspaper publications. Will that be correct?
Insofar as the details of the transaction, that is correct, Your Honor.
Well, like you, I've been always researching, and my basis is also the newspaper publications. Unfortunately, I did not have the knowledge which you have manifested to us. So, just for the record, what are the newspaper publications which became the basis of your summary and presentation before our committee a while ago?
Hala, tumaas na.
Just to be clear, Your Honor, the publications that we use for purposes of the details of the transaction are sourced from the press statement of the parties to the transaction themselves. So these are from ABS-CBN and TV5. With regard to other elements of my earlier intervention, Your Honor, which are not specific to the transaction, but relate to the factors that we have to examine if we conduct a review, those are based, Your Honor, on the law, our regulations, our merger review guidelines, and our experience in reviewing cases that have been brought before the Commission over the last 6 years, Your Honor.
Thank you very much. And according to you, in which I agree, that under the Bayanihan Law number 2, the threshold is 50 billion, and Bayanihan Law would expire on September 17.
Yes, Your Honor, that is also our understanding.
So, insofar as the present threshold is concerned, that would be still 50 billion and not the 1 billion provided for under the law.
That is correct, Your Honor. And if I may also clarify, the 1 billion initially provided under RA 10667 has, over the years, been adjusted to a higher amount given the powers accorded by the law to the Commission to adjust it according to inflation and purchasing power of consumers in the economy. So, in fact, the size of party test, meaning the amount of assets or revenues of either party, must be at least now 6 billion pesos. This was before Bayanihan 2 took effect. And the size of transaction, meaning the assets or revenues of the acquired party, must be at least 2.4 billion pesos prior to the effectivity of Bayanihan 2. But again, to emphasize, until the lapse of the provision in Bayanihan 2, we are compelled to follow the provisions which say that we can only compulsorily require notification of transactions with the value in excess of 50 billion pesos.
Just for the enlightenment of the members, based on your rules, what will be the threshold after September 17?
We are in the process, Your Honor, of making a determination of what the appropriate values are. If we are not going to revise
my question is very simple. Right now, based on your rules, what is the threshold? 6 billion, 3 billion, or 1 billion?
For size of party, Your Honor, it's 6 billion. For size of transaction, it is 2.4 billion.
Okay. And
Laki pa din,
legal basis? Does the law expressly provide that you have the right to increase the threshold of 1 billion?
Yes, Your Honor. Under Section 17 of the Philippine Competition Act, it clearly provides that the Competition Commission has the authority to adjust these thresholds on the basis of the performance of the economy, Your Honor. The exact term is
Salamat, Ma'am Sheila Maceda.
Billion and 2.4 billion. Were they effective before the passage of the Bayanihan Law?
Yes, Your Honor.
And when was the first time that this was applied? The new threshold?
These were applied in March of 2020, Your Honor.
March 2020. And
Every year, yes, just to clarify, Your Honor, every March of every year, we adjust the transaction thresholds.
Okay. Yung sa 1 billion, ang sumunod na ba agad 6 billion or 2.4 billion? O meron ba kayong naunang threshold?
May nauna pa, Your Honor. Yes.
Would you just
It
provide
progressively increased to these current amounts over the years.
I assume that these new thresholds are in writing.
Yes, Your Honor. We issue resolutions, which are publicly available and posted on our website as well.
And insofar as you are concerned, you made also the statement that this would be merely an investment in the shares of the stock of TD5. Will that be correct?
Your Honor, may I request for you to repeat your statement or question?
Is it correct when you stated that this investment will cover only the investment in shares of stock?
To clarify, Your Honor, what I referred to is that the exercise of the mandate of the Commission will pertain specifically to the investment agreement involving the acquisition of these shares of stock.
And so, in as much as there is an investment in the shares of stock, there will be no violation of the prohibition regarding the provisions of the Constitution, as well as the provision regarding the franchise that was issued to TD5.
The transactions in and of themselves, unless they result in a monopoly or combination in restraint of trade as provided in the Constitution, are not necessarily prohibited.
No, my question is it a correct statement that this is merely an investment in the shares of stock and there will be
no violation
of the Constitution and the franchise, of the restrictions under the franchise?
As of now, we cannot make a categorical statement that there is any violation, Your Honor.
Hey, well, I think I would be, but you have also made the statement that on account of this transaction, ABS-CBN will acquire 34.99% of the shares of stock of TD5.
That is correct, Your Honor.
And because of the convertible, what do you call that? Convertible
notes to equity, I believe, Your Honor.
After that, it will be exercised for a period of 8 years. And after 8 years, the stock holdings of ABS-CBN in the corporation will be 49.92.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, I'll go back to that later. To Attorney Cordova. Memorandum Order Number 603-06-2022.
Yes, Your Honor.
Initially, can you convince us that you have the power to issue this Memorandum Order Number 003-06-2022?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, the NTC has the power to, has a quasi-legislative power to, which it can exercise in regulation of the industries under our jurisdiction, Your Honors.
Well, my colleague, Kong Edsel Lagman, has read his letter to Speaker Martin Romualdez, and I would request you to answer point by point the allegations made by our dear colleague, Congressman Lagman. Can you do that?
Yes, yes, Your Honors, we will do that.
Another question. Do you have already a copy of the investment agreement between the two corporations?
Yes, Your Honor, we were able to receive a copy of the redacted agreement the other day, Your Honors.
What do you mean by redacted?
What they did was they blocked certain parts of the agreement, Your Honors. I think they were doing that because of confidentiality.
No, but the trouble is that, do you think that the confidentiality stipulation between the parties would also be enforceable or binding upon government agencies like the NTC?
No, Your Honors, because the government has the right to look into the agreements entered into by the parties, Your Honors, to check if it is
What action
within.
will you take, considering that what was given to you was a redacted copy of the investment certificate?
We will issue a subpoena, Your Honor, to ask for the copy which is not redacted, Your Honors.
To expedite matters, can we just request the Securities and Exchange Commission to give copies to NTC as well as to the Philippine Competition Commission? Will there be a violation, Attorney Padilla?
We will share that, Your Honor. We will, pursuant to the instruction of the Honorable Congress, we will share our copy to the.
No, actually, it's not an instruction, just a request.
Sorry, Your Honor.
Next question. As presented, after initially the stock holdings of ABS-CBN will be
34.99%.
0.99%. And after 8 years, it will be 49.97%. And this is one question which our resource persons have to consider. Right now, there are two bills which were filed in Congress for the issuance of a franchise before the Securities and Exchange Commission. One filed by our colleague, Johnny Pimentel, and the other one filed by, I think, the Bakabayan Bloc. Of course, the franchise application may be granted or might not be granted by Congress. My question is, in the event that the franchise will be approved by Congress, what would happen to this agreement between TV5 and ABS-CBN? You better answer that in writing. Number two, can the parties withdraw on account of the franchise issued in favor of ABS-CBN? Because there will be legal complications, I think. So the regulatory bodies must be ready to answer these questions, because we will be bringing up that issue for discussion of the franchise application. And finally, we wish to emphasize that we are very grateful to the information and positions of the government agencies. But I want to stress that insofar as franchise is concerned, as mentioned by my friend Congressman Lagman, it is the exclusive and sole domain of the Congress of the Philippines. Your opinion will guide us into what action we shall take, but ultimately it will be Congress who shall decide whether or not the agreement is null and void, whether or not we will approve it, because under the law, we have the right to review any franchise which we have issued, not to mention that we have also the oversight powers over these franchises issued by Congress. That would be all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
The Honorable Barsaga, maraming salamat po.
Mahaba pa to, guys. No?
We now
Talon na tayo kay Marcoleta sa last part niya, guys.
A copy.
Ka lang. Nasobra niya ata.
Of, di ba?
Wait lang.
Raised by Congressman Marcoleta earlier.
Ni-raise po yun ni Congressman Marcoleta. Pero sa inyo po, may na-violate ba ang TV5 sa franchise niya in forging investment with ABS-CBN? Kasi yung sinasabi niyong past violations, alam niyo po, Mr. Cordova, remiss na kayo dun sa inyong dun sa inyong tungkulin. Kasi 2 years have passed at ang sinasabi ninyo lang naman na violation ay yung pay-per-view. 'Di ba? So 2 taon na po yung nakalipas, wala pa naman kayong decision or resolution on that matter. Di po ba? Malinaw din naman doon sa mga pagdinig, doon sa franchise ng ABS-CBN before, yung mga BIR requirements, yung mga pagbabayad ng tax ay naano rin naman. Pero ito po, yung sa sinasabi nating TV5 na franchise. So yun lang po yung tanong ko. Yes or no po? Tingin niyo po ba may na-violate?
Sa TV5 po, preliminarily wala po kami nakikita.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Salamat po, Sir Cordova, sa inyong mga sagot.
Salamat po.
Maraming salamat, Deputy Minority Leader, Representative Castro. We will, before I proceed to the second round, there's a request for a second round. Are there any other members that are present who would like to speak or interpret? Kung wala, we now proceed to the second round. The Honorable Marcoleta is recognized for his second round.
I-last part natin to, guys. Last part. Shout out, DJ Byron is in the house.
Salamat, Mr. Chair.
You have the floor, sir.
Kay NTC Commissioner Cordova, Mr. Chair.
Proceed.
Commissioner Cordova, kanina po, you were asked by Congressman Lagman of several questions like whether or not you know certain laws that prohibit parties from commencing any contract prior to an undertaking of settling all obligations. Is it not true, Mr. Commissioner, that there are statutes which are embedded in the body of laws that will sustain an answer to his question that until and unless obligations are fulfilled, contracts can be prohibited or can even be stopped? Like contracts of loan, there are obligations of some of the parties that need to be complied with before a contract of loan can materialize, isn't it, Mr. Commissioner?
Yes, meron pong mga conditions that especially
a contract of purchase. There are obligations also before a party can complete the transaction. Even in the contract of marriage, there are obligations that need to be complied with. In other words, certain obligations are mandated in laws scattered in our judicial system that can be cited to support the memorandum that you cited earlier, Mr. Commissioner. Just for your reference.
Actually, may I respond, Your Honors? Actually po, ang nakikita ko nga pong magandang halimbawa, Mr. Chair, is that if you enter into a contract for the sale of real property, the transfer of the property will not be registered by the Register of Deeds unless you give a clearance from the city assessor's office or sa local government unit that the real property tax has been paid for that property. That's just one example.
That is correct, Mr. Commissioner. Even a contract of mortgage, there are obligations. A contract of transport, there are obligations. Even in simple life, there are several undertakings and arrangements that obligations are necessary to be complied with. This is supposed to be the case. And this is probably the basis why you made or you executed a memorandum order in order for some errant parties who do not intend to comply with obligations prior to undertaking new obligations. You also responded to the question of the Honorable Franz Castro, asking for your opinion whether or not TV5 may have violated its franchise. And in your opinion, which does not bind this committee, Mr. NTC Commissioner, TV5 has not violated. Is that your answer?
Actually, Your Honors, it's a conditional answer because we have not read the full the full investment agreement between the parties kasi po what was furnished our office is just a redacted copy, Your Honors.
Because, Mr. Commissioner, easily I can tell you that in Congress, the approval of a franchise is always assumed on 3 bases. One is technical competence, financial competence, and administrative competence. These requirements. If financial competence is not there, you will see that the franchise will not be approved. As a matter of fact, I recall, and maybe you're familiar with Presidential Decree 576-A, that particular presidential decree, Mr. Commissioner, provides that a radio station or no radio station or television network may be given a franchise unless it has sufficient capital. Do you recall that?
Yes, Your Honor. That's a condition, Your Honor. Actually po, sa amin po in our office, we cannot give an authority if hindi po na-reach yung 70-30 na debt equity ratio, Your Honor. So a franchisee should have 30% equity bago po namin bigyan ng license.
That is what I am saying. So again, that is already some semblance of, I would say, weakness or violation on the part of TV5 because in their application for a franchise, the technical, financial, and managerial competence were assumed by Congress based on the evidence and documents that they have submitted. Now we are putting into question the financial capability now, Mr. Commissioner, Mr. Chair, because of the sizable and substantial acquisition that represents about 35% of the outstanding capital stock of TV5. Can we now assume that financially TV5 is no longer in a position to support its franchise? That is one issue that you should look into, Mr. Commissioner, considering that you are the regulatory agency that is supposed to be interested in this particular issue. Because based on publicly available documents as cited by the commissioner from the Philippine Competition Commission, I have read a press statement of ABS-CBN, Mr. Commissioner, which says that the proceeds of the subscription in the primary common shares and the convertible note in the total amount of 4 billion pesos will fund the capital expenditures and operating expenses of TV5. This will put TV5 in bad light, and it is an admission that they have now a financial weakness. That is why they are asking for investment. Again, these are, I would say, manifestations of some problems insofar as, or doubts insofar as the competence, financial competence of TV5 is concerned. You will note, Mr. Commissioner, that TV5, the parent company of TV5 is MediaQuest. And I think you are in a position to know that MediaQuest is a conglomerate that is owned by PLDT Beneficial Trust Fund. Meaning to say, this trust fund are the ones being utilized. This pension fund is being utilized to acquire media outfits or interest in media outfits. You should look into also into the issue on whether or not pension funds, Mr. Commissioner, can be utilized for other purposes, much less in acquiring assets of existing media outfits. We will have to look into whether or not this funding are coming from Filipino citizens, considering the very strict provisions of law in the acquisition of or in the management and ownership of media outfits. This is something that we will have to look into. Again, I will emphasize that the obligations that you have been citing a while ago are still not complete, because I have cited a lot of violations that have been established during the last hearing, and I think I will be in a position to furnish you some of the details, so that I think it is not too late for you to be able to run after the airing network, considering that these violations have been established. Mr. Chair, I will go to the lawyer of the Securities and Exchange Commission for a short question, if he's still there.
Please proceed, Attorney Padilla of SEC. Attorney Padilla?
Good afternoon, Your Honor. Yes, sir.
Okay. There are some questions raised to the second round by the Honorable Marcoleta.
Attorney Padilla, first of all, I'd like to thank you for your participation and the quite substantial information, even if you were just basing it on some summarized documents that was furnished you, including the redacted copy of an investment agreement. My question is, would you allow or would you accept formally a redacted copy of the investment agreement submitted to you?
Sir, actually, we were just, Your Honor, we were actually earlier discussing with the director of the Market Securities Regulation Department, which is a department tasked to oversee and regulate publicly listed companies. And we are already in the direction of requiring or directing ABS-CBN to furnish us with the non-redacted copy of the agreement, Your Honor.
Yeah, thank you, because as the sentinel of securities in this country, you're supposed to be guarding against any possible misrepresentation in all the documents being submitted to you, and I hope you will not allow yourselves to be recipients of a redacted copy, which means that they are not trying to give you the entire body of information that you're supposed to get. They are hiding from you some basic and critical information from which you will base your responsibility in replying to the mandate as already asked of you by Congress. So, is that a sign that, or will you think that, given the secrecy or the alleged secrecy that they argue, Congress will not be able to get a copy from them, Attorney Padilla, considering that to them it's a very sacred document that not even the Securities and Exchange Commission not get the entire unabridged copy?
Your Honor, by my personal position is that the government, including from Congress and even the SEC, can compel regulated entities to submit documents, especially if the same is required to perform the respective mandates, Your Honor.
That is why, attorney, these big networks are always emphasizing transparency and accountability. They're talking about pre-press. They're talking about press freedom. But here you are unable to get the kind of copy that you deserve. It is as if that they are mocking the authority of the Securities and Exchange Commission. I hope Congress will be able to give a copy, a complete copy, and if they do that, I assure you we will give you a copy, the same copy that it will furnish the House of Representatives. Thank you very much, Attorney. Mr. Chair, I will go to I will go back to the Commissioner of Philippine Competition Commission.
Please proceed. You still have the floor. The Attorney Bernabe.
Yes, Your Honor.
Attorney Bernabe, I beg your indulgence. I know it's late in the afternoon already, and you have so much work. But it's just I am disturbed by the fact that, of course, there are two conflicting laws here that we are invoking. We're invoking Bayanihan 2 insofar as the 50 billion threshold is concerned, which appears to have override Section 17 of the Philippine Competition Act, is it not? But will you not bother to agree with me, Commissioner, that considering that Bayanihan 2 was legislated in the environment of a pandemic, meaning to say it is a recovery act, which of course was legislated in order for our country to recover from the debilitating effect of the pandemic as soon as we can, so that we needed the most that we can get, including putting a 50 billion threshold in order for the commission competition not to look into, meaning to say below that it is exempted. But Section 17, if I go back to that, that is the threshold when we talk about competition per se, where the Philippine Competition Commission is working in the context of promoting the consumer's welfare, while Bayanihan 2 was working in the context of securing our people, because we need to recover as much as we can because of the effect of the pandemic. I'd like to submit to an opinion that maybe, considering that this case is not about recovery, it's about a business deal, it's about an investment, and the primordial concern here is to be able to serve the consumer. It's not about recovery. This investment, this reducted investment agreement, which was supplied to the Securities and Exchange Commission, which is not yet obtained by your office, not even the House of Representatives, is not about recovery, Commissioner. So don't you think that for the greater purpose and within the meaning and mandate of competition, the 1 billion is supposed to be the threshold?
Thank you for that perspective, Your Honor. What I can say is that when deliberations were ongoing with regard to Section 4EEE of Bayanihan 2, the Competition Commission interposed an objection against this increase, even temporarily, for notification thresholds to be set at 50 billion. Our position was premised on the fact that many transactions which harm the economy actually occur within the range of 5 billion to 10 billion, not at that amount of 50 billion. But of course, the wisdom of the Congress which you represent prevailed. And I'm afraid, submit to the principle of dura lex sed lex, that while the law may be hard, it is still the law. And we would be running afoul of the law if we submit our own interpretation of what you legislated and disobey the explicit mandate under Section 4EEE of Bayanihan 2. But having said that, Your Honor, it is not as if the implementation of Section 4EEE, which is not to require notification on a mandatory basis, deprives the Commission of an opportunity to review. I must emphasize that we can review the transaction on a motu proprio basis, or if the parties voluntarily notify their transaction to the Commission.
That is what I'm trying to emphasize, Mr. Commissioner, because even if Bayanihan 2 may have overrode Section 17 of your own charter, it seems to me that the overriding or the more significant aspect of your job now is to be able to safeguard and to look into the welfare of the consumers. Let us not belabor the notification issue, but let us go ahead into the meat and to the very or the center of I would say the very objective why we are having this hearing today, to see to it that competition is not stifled, to see to it that competition, meaning to say not harmful competition will persist, but in the end it's a competition that is healthy, with the object of being able to safeguard the interest of the consuming public. This is what I'm trying to emphasize to you. Thank you very much, Mr. Commissioner. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Ayun.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right.
Thank you very much, the Honorable Marcoleta.
Okay
Are
na
there
tayo
any
dito,
other
mga
members
kabsat.
who would like to go on a second round?
Okay, ihap na natin. Sabi ni Sir Leonardo, siguro nga nalulugi na ang TV5 dahil sa walang nanonood sa kanila. Kaya pumasok sa merger na yan para magkaroon ulit siya ng pondo. Wala namang kasing mapapanood sa TV5. Basta marami pa nanonood sa mga vloggers. Tama ka dyan, Sir Leonardo. Sabi naman ng kabsat, DJ Byron, Music and TV, dapat talaga dumaan yan sa deeper investigations before allowing the joint ventures. Kasi ang mangyayari, baka kikita ang ABS-CBN under the table. Nako, malamang ganyan na mangyayari, DJ Byron. Tapos ang isa pa, kinokontrol nila ang TV5. Considering that they only have 34.99% of the total shares. Pero yun nga, no, mukhang nakakita na naman ang ating ang ating Dante Marcoleta, ang ating Congressman Marcoleta. Kaya talaga, hindi niya talaga titigilan to. Kaya siguro biglang kabig talaga. At biglang tawag nito post muna, sabi nila Kaya doon nga sa kanilang mga statement like ABS-CBN or TV5 nag-usap na sila na mag-post muna sila sa kanilang plano. So considering na at the end of the month, of this August, talagang tuloy-tuloy na. Kasi ang problema, ayun nga, mukhang napaisip, mukhang alanganin at mukhang mahihila ang TV5. So yung TV5 na merong prangkisa, baka matulad sa kanila ng ABS-CBN. Pero anyway, let's see. Dahil based dito, alam ko magkakaroon pa ng second hearing. So puro first hearing, no? Parang doon lang sa hearing ng sugar industry natin. My God. Anyway, Mabsat, we've been doing this live for almost 2 hours and 38 minutes, 39 actually. So medyo napahaba-haba. Kaya sabi dito ni DJ Byron, post muna, sabi ng TV5 kasi baka pati sila matasara. Exactly. Walang kaduda-duda, DJ Byron. Kaya nga, Mukhang baka madamay pa sila sa no? Baka yung imbis na makatulong biglang aray, hinila sila. Kaya ops, nakakatakot yata nga makakwanta makasanib puwersa, ayan eh. So anyway mga kabsat, so I believe may mga kasama pa tayo naka-live diyan, tingnan nga natin. I believe, alam ko may naka-live pa dito mga kasama natin pero check ko muna para sigurado tayo. And again, thank you very much sa mga hindi pa po nagla-like and subscribe diyan. Baka si DJ Byron naka-live po. Si DJ Byron. JDB comment. Sorry JDB. At saka si Derek Freddy Valera. Anong comment? Ano ang maawa naman kayo sa mga sakada at jeepney driver. Tapos naman si JDB's comment. Ang topic niya is merger ng DOS at 5. Okay. Parehas. So, ayan. Mali daw at BOC officials. Wala daw mali at BOC officials. Ayan. So, ayan nga guys. Nakita natin talagang nasabon-sabon na naman sila. At syempre, si Congressman Lagman mukhang may something. At ito, TV5 merger post lang. Customs officials, lagot kayo. Patay tayo dyan. Anyway, mabsat. So, again, thank you very much sa inyong oras. Pasensya na, medyo nagloloko yung ating sound system na naman, no? So, mukhang nagpapahiwatig na talaga na kailangan na sigurong palitan. Anyway, so again, thank you very much, Kabsat. Sa lahat po, DJ Byron, maraming salamat. Sir Leonardo Ansag na lagi nandyan. At syempre sa mga silent viewers natin po, maraming salamat. Mula po kanina. So, thank you very much. Papaalam mo na si Maestro. It's been 2 hours and 40 minutes. So, thank you very much. Sayonara, good night, and have a nice day. Thank you po. More blessings sa lahat. Bye-bye.